Well, hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you on the line today, and welcome to today's webinar on climate action in the dairy supply chain, hosted by the South Pole Group. Thank you very much for your time and interest for joining us today. As you are well aware, the dairy sector is one of the fastest growing agricultural sectors in the world, and with millions of farmers depending on it for their economic livelihoods. At the same time, it is, of course, an important emitter of greenhouse gas emissions and itself dependent on productive land and natural resources. So the sector really faces this challenge of delivering real low carbon growth at scale while also increasing its climate resiliency. So my name is Florian Reber. I'm a senior manager here at South Pole Group, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for today's discussion. Today, we will hear from dairy and sustainable supply chain experts and discuss how climate action in the dairy supply chain can be accelerated. I'm delighted to present to you three wonderful speakers who will give us each about a presentation of 10 to 12 minutes. And we will hear today from Mr. Jan-Peter Leschen, who is a researcher and project leader at the Sustainable Soil Management Division of Wageningen University, a leading research university whose mission is to explore the potential of nature to improve the quality of life. We will also hear from Jaap Petreus, who is the Manager of Corporate Environmental Affairs and Sustainability at Royal Friesland Campina, one of the 6 largest global dairy companies with a revenue of over $2 billion. Last but not least, we will also hear from Tilman Silber, who is Director of Sustainable Supply Chains here at South Pole Group, where he works with clients and partners on accelerating sustainable agricultural supply chains. Now, before I will invite our first speaker to kick us off, just allow me to make some brief housekeeping comments, please. So for now, all your lines are actually muted. You're in listen-only mode, and the only way to get unmuted is to ask questions, which you will have the chance to do during the second part of the webinar, when we will have a moderated discussion. To ask your questions, you do have 2 options. Either you click on the raise your hand, ask a question options on the right side of your webinar screen. And then we will give you the floor and manage the Q&A. Or you have the possibility to type your question also on the right side of the WebEx interface, if you rather feel like typing in your question instead of speaking up in the webinar. Lastly, the webinar is actually recorded, and we will be sharing the recording of the webinar in the follow-up, together with the presentations that you'll be seeing from the 3 speakers that we have. So with this, let's start. And Jan-Peter, I would like to turn to you first and ask you to give us an overview of what science actually has to say about the climate change challenges in the dairy sector. So Jan-Peter, please, over to you.
Yeah. Thank you, Florian, for this introduction. Before, just wait till I have the option to click the screen to start my presentation. I think it's still, I have to wait a little before I get the control on the screen. Yeah, okay. Thank you. So thank you for giving this opportunity to give an introduction on the issue of challenges of climate change in the dairy sector. Well, first of all, there is both challenges in terms of we have to mitigate emissions from the sector, but there is also a need for adapting to climate change and what you can do for an adaptation. The focus of the presentation will be on the mitigation part, but in the last slide I will also discuss a few points on the adaptation side. Well, as FAO already stated a few years ago, the livestock sector is a large contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. Their most recent study from 2013 states that 14.5% of the total global greenhouse gas emissions are related to livestock, of which dairy is contributing 20%. As the picture also shows, it's mainly cattle. It's because of the enteric fermentation emissions. It's a large contributor. So there is a need with targets on climate change reduction to reduce emissions, and it was calculated if we want to reach our goals, we have to start and on global scale, 1 gigaton CO2 equivalents of emission reduction would be required. Well, I've done myself most of the work on in Europe. So the work we did on the greenhouse gas impacts of livestock for Europe shows also in the figure that in Europe, dairy is, together with beef, the largest sector as well, contributing to the emissions. If we look a bit more detail, what kind of emissions sources we have in the dairy sector? Well, the main one is enteric fermentation, producing methane. Manure management, both methane and nitrous oxide emissions is important. There's nitrous oxide emissions from soils which are fertilized, receiving manure and fertilizer. It's another important source. There's CO2 from the use of energy and fuel. And there's also pre-chain emissions like the manufacture of fertilizers and pesticides. Well, to sketch first the policy context, as you all know, there's the Paris Agreement, which has a focus both on mitigation and adaptation, with adaptation having the climate fund proposed to be $100 billion at least to support developing countries as well to tackle climate change. And the main target is to reach a temperature change that should not be more than 2 degrees, and preferably even more or less to 1.5 degrees. To reach that means that after 2050 there should be net zero emissions. So the sequestration should compensate for the emissions which are still there. Like agriculture will have some emissions, not all emissions can be set to zero, as it deals with biological processes. However, the promised commitments are not yet sufficient. So we know that what is proposed is the first step, but there should be stronger commitments coming in the next decades. Well, the EU responded to this with their 2030 climate and energy framework, which states a target of minus 40% greenhouse gas emissions compared to 1990, which is split in one part, the average trading sector, where the large industry and energy emissions are, and the non-ETS sector, in which agriculture falls. That should reduce their emissions overall by 30% compared to 2005. This is currently, the Commission gave a proposal last year, and which is discussed now. And each country got a share in that reduction target of 30%. For example, the Netherlands has 36%, but also some more Eastern European countries, they have lower targets, as it is GDP related. So that states more or less also where could where has the dairy sector to contribute. In this graph, it states more or less the historic, it's overall all emissions in the EU, stating the historic trend till now, where we see an average reduction of 1% per year on average. Up to reach the 2030 target, we see that we need more action with 1.4% per year. But if we really look to the future and want to reach 95% reduction by 2050, we have to come up to reduction percentages of 4.6% per year, which is a huge challenge. So the more we can do already, it helps in starting later. Of course, for the dairy sector, it's impossible to reach that kind of targets, but it's clear the sector has to contribute. So if we look at a global level to the footprint of milk, we see there's a very skewed curve of emissions per kilogram of fat and protein corrected milk, which is stated on the y-axis. And if we link that that's clearly a link to the milk yields per cow. So we can distinguish three main groups: one with very high footprint, where you see really sub-Saharan African countries. Each dot represents one country, which have subsistence farming without market access. Then you have a group of countries which are mainly characterized by smallholder systems and multifunctional systems. And you see a group of countries which have highly specialized systems and are commodity-based production, which have the lowest footprint. So improving the efficiency and the yield per cow is one of the main options to reduce the footprint of the milk production. Well, if we look to the EU, the variation is less, but still there we can see almost a factor 2 difference in footprint, where we have an average EU footprint of 1.3 kilograms of CO2 equivalents per kilogram of milk. But there's quite a range of differences amongst countries, which partly is due to differences in circumstances. For example, countries with organic soils will have higher emissions compared to countries without them. But also the efficiency and the kind, for example, the use of fertilizer difference makes a difference in the footprint. What can we do to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions from the sector? This is a graph produced by the Global Research Alliance and the Sustainable Agriculture Initiative, which gives a nice summary overview of the options which are there, which are categorized in 6 main categories. And they are expressed in whether it's already kind of best practice that can be applied, or it's still proof of concept and has to be requires further research. There are options, of course, related to the feed and nutrition by changing feed composition. There are options in the animal genetics and the breeding, for example, try to improve the efficiency and milk production, but there's also more a future option to have breeding for animals with lower methane production. You can have additives, which change modify the rumen and can reduce emissions in that way. There are options on your land with grassland management that can improve the grazing management, for example, but also improve carbon sequestration by having good grassland management. More in the technical side, there's options in manure management like digesters and other options to reduce the emissions from the manure storage. And also animal health there are options to improve the animal health, and in that way you increase both the efficiency of the whole system and can improve the milk production, and in that way reduce the footprint. So how can farmers deal with those reduction? What can they do to reduce their emissions? First of all, they have to become aware of the actual emissions on their farm to have a starting point where can they make improvements. There's a whole range of calculators that can be used to assess greenhouse gas emissions from the farm. We've recently worked with the Cool Farm Alliance, and we provided a new updated module for the dairy sector, which is now available online. But there are also national tools that are more specific and adapted to the national circumstances. For example, the Cap de Sierre tool used in France. A well-known one is also the Carbon Navigator in Ireland, Farm Smart in the US. In the Netherlands, we have the Kringloopwijzer. And so it's a range of tools, which is important to give farmers insight. But if we are looking at comparison of those tools, we should be clear that we are using the same kind of methodologies and system boundaries. However, just knowing their emissions is not sufficient. The next step is a shift from monitoring to implementing measures, and that farmers get advice on which are the specific kind of options they can apply on their farm to reduce emissions. We are working on that within the CSA Booster project, in which South Pole is also partnering. We are partner and working on a solution finder where we are working on giving specific solutions that are fit for the specific farm, because most of the solutions, they are really depending on the region and the context of the farm. So the final sheet on climate change adaptation. And well, we see that we have to deal with climate change. We already see more extreme weather, having longer droughts, but also periods with more intense rainfall and flooding. So there's a risk on lower feed and fodder production due to these circumstances. It's also maybe not directly, but indirectly there can be due to harvests that are not succeeding, an increase in feed prices. But there's also a direct effect on milk production, for example, due to heat stress by cows. And there's a risk on the emergence of new diseases and pests due to higher temperatures. So what can a farmer do? It's possible measures. It's have a diverse feed basket. So not be depending on one kind of feed only, like we saw in France when they had was a long drought in 2003, I think, and farmers were having not sufficient grass available. So they can also plan already to have irrigation and improve their water use efficiency for the crops. And in stables, there are options for better temperature control. Which brings me to my last slide on the conclusions. Well, the dairy sector we see with the targets coming up will have to contribute as well to the mitigation targets. We can also say that the efficiency measures alone will not be sufficient to reach those targets, and we should also go to more technical and more structural measures. Which some point I didn't discuss, but which is now coming up, is that national mitigation targets, where it's which are aimed at the total amount of emissions within a country, and footprint-based supply chain targets, as companies are setting, do not always match and have to be aligned. And my last point is that we have to make a shift from only monitoring to also getting implementation of farm-specific mitigation measures, which I think fits well to the next presentation by Jaap. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Jan-Pieter, and I couldn't have made a better transition to our next speaker. This was really a rich presentation, giving us, let's say, the scientific foundations for why this topic really matters. Thank you so much. Jaap, you will tell us more about ongoing efforts to create more consistency and alignment within the industry about like how we think and act upon sustainability within the dairy sector. So the floor is yours. Another 12 minutes of interesting presentations from your side.
Well, thank you very much, Florian, for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone, and good morning, good evening. As you noticed from Jan-Pieter, we see that there are a lot of challenges in the international dairy sector, and we also see that there is a real challenge for the dairy producers who are working with the dairy farmers to work on these challenges. And what I will explain is how the international dairy sector wants to move forward and how to demonstrate continuous improvement on sustainable dairy production. So my name is Jaap. I'm the Corporate Manager Sustainability within Friesland Campina. Friesland Campina works with 20,000 dairy farmers, so quite a challenge to work on sustainability together. But sustainability is also an important subject within the Dutch dairy sector, and we work very close together in the field of sustainability. You can see what we are working on. The Dairy Sustainability Framework. It was launched during the International Dairy Summit in 2013 in Yokohama, Japan. And the DSF, that is a framework that intends to be the common language for sustainable dairy production. So it is meant to be an international approach to work on sustainability. But one of the challenges, and you also hear it from, and you see it from the graphs from Jan-Peter, is the regional differences between dairy farming. You have small dairy farmers in developing countries, in Africa with 2 cows, small system, up to large systems of 10,000 cows in the US. And the challenge is, how can we make and how can we set up a model, an approach that every farmer and every farm system in the world can work with this dairy sustainability framework. For us, it is also very important that we have a global approach. So all global dairy associations like the IDF, the International Dairy Federation, GDP, EDA, Side Platform, the US dairy sector, the African dairy sector, Dairy Asia, Pan American dairy sector, and others are involved in this approach. So it is a really global commitment for the international dairy sector. Well, in order to support all dairy production systems in the world, we developed and we got a lot of support of the consultancy firm Sustainability, who is a UK firm. We have good insights in international standards. And the system is based on a global layer and a regional layer. You can see it on the sheet here. And the global principles are defined and are agreed within the international dairy sector. And regional prioritization is based on materiality analysis and prioritization based on regional discussions with your stakeholders. And then we have the sustainability teams that are based on more than 100 stakeholder interviews. And 11 teams are defined to be relevant for the whole sector. And you can see the 11 teams. It are People, Planet, Profit, greenhouse gas, animal care, biodiversity, product safety, but also rural economics, market development, so more the financial part of sustainability, and of course very important for farmers' livelihood. Yeah, as I said, we do believe that the dairy processor has a very important part in this whole approach, because you can have a lot of challenges in the dairy sector, but the dairy processor has a role. In one side, the dairy processor sells the products from the dairy farmers to the market, to the food producers. So there is a raw material stream. And on the other side, you see there are many requirements from the market to the food processor, and then to the dairy processor, and then to their farmers. You can compare it with, for instance, with food safety and food quality. You see the same approach that we have with sustainability. Requirements are set from the market, and the dairy processor, who collects the milk from his dairy suppliers, can work with his farmers in the field of sustainability. And that is exact where we have the position of the dairy sustainability framework. The food processor or the dairy processor has the responsibility to work with his farmers and to set up standards, objective targets, and so on with his dairy farmers. In the scheme, you can see the principles of the dairy sustainability framework. The main parts are in the blue side, the Plan, Do, Check, Act part. That's the management part and the integration of sustainable dairy production at the level of the dairy processor. Then in the green part, you see the 11 core teams. On the red part, you see we have within the side dairy platform, we defined minimum levels. because we do believe that when you want to be a member of the dairy sustainability framework, you must have minimum levels taken into account, that are the ILO principles, the 5 freedom for animals, comply with applicable legislation, and no deforestation of high conservation value areas. For us, they are so important, they are non-negotiable, so that they are minimum levels. And then the enablers, they are also important because they make the system deliver their objectives. At one side, the decent governance structure, because when you don't have a decent governance structure, you can define nice targets, but you won't deliver the objectives in any way. So an important governance structure is very important. And of course, and that is different in sustainability related to food safety, a stakeholder dialogue, because your stakeholders, you have to work with stakeholders to find out what are the important issues, what are material areas for you, and where do you have to work on. With the introduction of the Dairy Sustainability Framework in 2013, we developed a number of tools in order to support the members. So in 2014, we developed a guidance document for the regional implementation, and that was all based on the Plan, Do, Check, Act approach, so the Deming circle, very well known in all quality systems. And in 2015 and 2013, we executed several regional pilots to find out how it works and how we can define with the regional implementation. And at this moment, we are working on the, and that's step 4, the uniform performance milestones. We are developing the global KPIs on the 11 teams, and they are to be developed in 2017. And we are also developing the milestones for the management approach, and I will explain that a little bit later. So in fact, the development of the Dairy Sustainability Framework is working in 2 parallel working streams. That is the international approach and the international rollout of the Dairy Sustainability Framework. And that's all to connect and make progress for all dairy producers in the world. So that is the common language. And in the second area, we are developing specific tools for DSF members. And with these tools, they can demonstrate how they implemented the Dairy Sustainability Framework, how they make progress, and how they work on the 11 teams on their regional approach. And this tool is developed within the dairy, in the SAI Sustainable Agriculture Initiative Dairy Working Group, and the dairy processors and the dairy buyers, they work together on this, and it is a real pre-competitive instrument to demonstrate how you work on sustainability. When you look at the results, so that after the launch in 2013, we worked very hard. The international dairy sector worked very hard, and we achieved a real significant achievement. We see more and more, and we have agreements, for instance, with FAO in the Dairy Declaration of Rotterdam. We see the Dairy Sustainability Framework is really seen as the international common language for sustainable dairy production. And we also see that the Dairy Sustainability Framework members, they see the advantage of working together. We have a lot of webinars between the members to find out how can you set materiality analysis, how do you work with stakeholders, how do you get your prioritization model, how do you implement your system, and so on. So we have a lot of support together for more advanced sustainability DSF members to members who are starting up the process. So we see a very important part that we are working together and to raise the bar in the sustainability level of dairy production all over the world. And to see that on point 4, also very important for us is the reduction of external audit costs, because audit costs are really high, because a lot of food processors want to know, for instance, at farm level, what sustainability is. And with this system, we try to reduce the external audit cost, because a lot of dairy processors are also checking their farmers on food safety, and they can do it together they can check the sustainability level together with the food level, and therefore we can reduce enormous number of audit costs. So the second step, what we are working on is the maturity stages tool, because we believe that dairy is not an endpoint. Sustainability is a road that you have to go. You are never ready with sustainability. It is a verb. You have to work on sustainability year by year. So it is not that you have sustainable dairy, but that you are on the road of sustainability in dairy. And therefore, we developed a maturity stages tool, and that are 5 stages of continuous improvement. And it is based on very large scientific research. 5 maturity stages are defined from initial level. On the initial level, every dairy sustainability framework member can step in. It is a real standard low level to optimize the level where dairy is on where sustainability and working on sustainability is almost the only aspect that the company cares for. And most dairy companies will work on level 3 and 4 and can demonstrate progress on the 11 teams. And the criteria, and at this moment we are hard working on the criteria for the 5 stages, and they are developed within a large stakeholder workshop from the side dairy working group. So it is really roundtable within many stakeholders that we work on sustainability. Then my last sheet of the presentation. So working on sustainability in 2017, we have quite a lot of challenges. So the working group who develops the dairy sustainability framework business-to-business tool that we planned the next step for the coming period. First step is to define and describe the criteria in order to demonstrate the process of continuous improvement, so the management part of the dairy sustainability framework. We are working on an assurance scheme in order to know how to demonstrate the criteria, so they are combined, the criteria and the assurance scheme are combined. And we're also requested to our dairy buyers, our large dairy buyers, to develop a standardized report between the dairy processor and the dairy buyer, that how we can demonstrate the progress on the dairy sustainability framework. Second half of the year, we will start with the piloting of the tool at some DSF members, and we will learn how it works and how we can demonstrate the progress on the dairy sustainability framework in a proper way. And during the IDF World Dairy Summit in Belfast in October 2017, we will present the results, and we will try to convince many DSF members to work with this tool in order to work on a very continuous improvement way to work on sustainable dairy production, because we believe this is a very good instrument to demonstrate the society, but also your customers, that you work on sustainable dairy production. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much for this exciting presentation. I think it's great to hear about the increased industry alignment that you are actually achieving within the association, and we all truly look forward to some of the results that you will present in Belfast later this year. And Tilman, before I hand over to you, maybe just a quick note to our audience. I'm sure you already have plenty of questions in your mind that you would like to ask later on in the webinar. So please start clicking on the little hand icon on the top right of the interface, so we will be able to call upon you, or else type them in the question box where you can start noting down your questions. So with that, Tilman, our last speaker of today, Tilman Silber, Director of Sustainable Supply Chains here at Southpole Group. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Florian, and welcome also from my side to everybody to this webinar. And thanks and congratulations to my previous speakers. What I would like to do today is to share some thoughts that really arise from our recent work in dairy about where we moving towards effective climate action dairy supply chains. What does it look like? What are the key elements that are needed in order to achieve such action? And what are the barriers and potentials for improvement in achieving those different elements? I want to start off with a short example that's describing a project that we've been working on over the last years in Switzerland to illustrate a little bit what I mean by effective climate action. So it really refers very much to what both Jaap and Jan-Peter refer to, really the action at the farm level, which matches the local conditions and requirements. So this project that I'm using as an example is a project where linseeds are fed to the cows. You see it on the top right. That's a mean to improve enteric fermentation, which is, as we've seen from Jan-Peter, one of the most important sources of greenhouse gas emissions in the dairy sector. Farmers are supported both in kind, so technically that's mostly done by the B2B dairy processor, which directly offtakes the milk from the farmers. So he's very much engaged in providing the technical capacity building, the monitoring and so forth to the farmer. And also there is a direct financial incentive which comes from the brands all the way downstream the supply chain. So there's one major brand engaged in this project who is paying effectively more per liter of milk which has been produced in a climate-friendly way. So they're paying effectively a price premium on climate-friendly milk. And all around that, there is a monitoring system illustrated by the picture on the bottom left hand, which enables then the brand to make claims about how successful their climate action has been, and they can communicate that to their clients and their customers and to their wider audience. So starting using that as an example, what is really needed in order to allow effective climate action in dairy? We've identified 5 elements, ingredients that we see really as core. Those include low carbon solutions, so the actual technologies that are implemented or the management practices, implementation knowledge or how to implement it, partnerships, financing, and monitoring aspects. And my guiding question for this presentation is, are all those ingredients available today, or maybe which might not be as much available, and where do we have to work further in order to make it happen? So what I'm going to do is to go through all 5 elements one by one and share some thoughts with you. Starting with low carbon solutions in dairy, this really is based on a piece of work that we did in the last year, where we assessed low carbon solutions in quite a few dairy markets around the world, really. And what we found, very much in line with what Peter said, there's really today plenty of options available, and they're ranging from very low-tech management practices, such as feed management, such as pasture management, manure management, which are often the best practices in low-developed markets, up to fairly high-tech solutions, which need also a lot of installation and technology, such as manure digestion and renewable energy and other ones. In developed markets, we found that biogas from manure, so capturing the methane from manure and producing biogas from it, as well as wastewater treatments, are 2 very good options to really get quite a high climate impact. And in addition to the already existing solution, we see and you also, Jan-Peter pointed this out, we see quite a strong pipeline of innovations that is coming up, particularly around feed additives, and we've worked with a number of those in the past, nitrification inhibitors, vaccines, we heard breeding, so quite a lot of technologies in the pipeline, which will need more investments in order to improve their impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but also really their effectiveness in terms of increasing yields and so forth. So my conclusion on this element is overall the availability of solutions is high. So here a green light, and there are even more in the pipeline that will come online over the coming years. The next aspect, implementation knowledge. What we found in working on different projects on farm in Switzerland, in Turkey, elsewhere, it's really a lot about capacity. So training and capacity building are really, really key to a successful implementation of the solutions on the ground, particularly in the less developed market. And at the same time, also it might take a lot of time. Farms often evolved over many generations and decades, so it takes time to really change those practices on farm. And it's crucial to over longer time provide training and capacity building. When working on implementation on farms, there's of course many challenges. 2 most important that I would like to highlight here: multiple stakeholders that are engaged. Often there's a difference maybe between the farm owner, the farm management, then you have the feed supplier, you have the direct buyer, intermediaries, and so forth. So many stakeholders that might have diverse incentives and that have to be managed in implementing such solutions. And we all know it, often the milk markets are very politicized. So very important to work around the policy framework, to work around the existing subsidy quota framework and so forth. The good news really is we found in our work implementation knowledge broadly exists. We have a lot sitting in extension services, but also in universities and other knowledge institutions. So often what is needed to do is really just to connect, and just in quotation marks, but it's really to connect the dots. For example, make the knowledge from the universities come on farm in order to speed up the implementation of the practices. So again, I would give this here a green light from my side. The challenge exists, but by and large, the know-how for implementation of the climate action is fairly high overall. In terms of partnership, why do we need partnerships? The key underlying challenge is that farmers typically don't have a specific interest in climate action. They're optimizing their farm from a business perspective. So we need to work in partnership in order to bring greenhouse gas and climate considerations onto their agenda and incentivize favorable behavior. And what we see, and I think Jaap, you also mentioned that supply chain engagement is really key. The brands, but partly also to a lesser degree the manufacturers, dairy companies, they face the consumer pressure and from the pressure from the more general audience as well, from the general public. So they need to work and form strong partnerships all along the supply chain, so it really arrives at the farm level to make a change where it matters, and that's at the farm level. There are other very important stakeholders that can be extremely helpful when forming partnerships around climate action in dairy, most notably the public sector. They might, for example, provide co-investments, and we're seeing that right now in different countries in Europe where the public sector can help to really come up with quite significant investment, for example, in biogas or renewable energy. Universities, of course, as knowledge providers, feed providers, solution providers, are other important players that can be partnered up with. The last point, so what we are seeing from our work, that in terms of partnerships, there is still a lot to do, and competition and commercial interests still introduce very high barriers for effective partnerships all along, or across supply chains. So by and large, the rating that we are giving here from our perspective, yes, thank you, is rather low. So there are good examples, positive examples emerging, but by and large, the prevalence of such partnerships is still rather low, and there's a lot of potential to move on. Financing, good news is, and we also seen that in the previous presentations, many interventions can increase both the milk yield and at the same time reduce the climate impact. So that is very favorable for the business case of climate action in dairy supply chains. And there's also many technologies around which need very low or actually even no capital investments. So it's easier to implement them from a financial side. I'm thinking again about pasture management, manure management in some cases and others. But some of the most effective action types, solution types, low carbon solutions also need quite high capex in order to be implemented, including manure digesters, including renewable energy, wastewater treatment, and others. So here the public sector is a very promising partner for co-investments. I mentioned this already. And referring back to the partnership on the previous slide, how can we make from a financial perspective, the partnerships along supply chains work? And what we see is the emergence of at least 5 different types, finance instruments. One I mentioned already for the illustrative example, that's price premiums for climate-friendly milk. Another one we're currently seeing, for example, in the UK, where one of the major food brands starts to pay direct carbon payments towards the farmers. So really they pay per ton of CO2 that has been saved. That's a concept we in the carbon world refer to as insetting. Strategic co-investments might not be just from the public sector, but also from brands or manufacturers which work together with the farms or with the processors and the dairy companies in order to invest where a higher capex is needed. I'm thinking again about renewable energy or manure digesters is also a concept that we see emerging on the market. And then more traditionally, how it has been often done in the past is the grants, the more classical finance instrument. A challenge where we see a lot of potential in the future is the fact of shared suppliers. So how can maybe 2 competing brands, for example, work together that share the same supplier base? How can they work together and co-invest into the shared supplier base? We see a lot of potential there to evolve further in the future. Conclusion here, medium availability. So there are really quite a few options emerging, but limited experience in applying those, and we need to further evolve those going forward. The last aspect, monitoring. Jan-Peter, you mentioned on that, you referred to this also partly. This is based on a piece of research we have done also as part of the CSA Booster project last year, where we assessed 45 different greenhouse gas monitoring tools for their suitedness in the dairy sector and specifically to different types of solutions. And we found that by and large the scientific base, and with this really the tools themselves are really improving, but there's still a lot of potential to improve their usability, the use of external data sources. I'm thinking, for example, about nutrition balance data that might be available at the market level, which are not always used in such tools. And also there's very little information on the uncertainty of the results that comes out of these monitoring tools. One thing we find in our research as well was that those tools are really not, there's no one size fits all, so those tools are not suited for all the different solutions. So depending on the program that one supply chain might want to set up and the low carbon solutions they want to implement, different monitoring tools are the most suited ones because they're just differently customized to different solutions. And going forward, one of the biggest challenges we see in terms of carbon accounting, there's currently not a well-developed infrastructure that would govern how carbon claims could be made. So if you again think about the case that I just made before, the example where two international potentially competing brands would be co-investing into one shared supplier, how do we make sure that not both claim the same carbon reduction, because that would be a double counting. So how do we make sure that we have an appropriate and fair accounting of the carbon claims for all the partners that are engaged? In conclusion, again, we have a medium availability of monitoring options, a fairly strong set is there, and we have quite a bit of potential also to improve further. If I'm bringing this all together, we've seen we having, my conclusions here, this is my last slide, we see we having low carbon solutions plenty available, implementation knowledge I would argue we also have plenty available. There's quite a bit to do still, or something to do still on financing and monitoring side, but most ingredients are available. What's really needed now is to go ahead and apply them in partnerships, very practically learn about how to navigate in competitive environments and so on. So the technical ingredients are mostly there. What you have to focus on in terms of further evolvement is particularly the financing and the monitoring tools in order to make climate action happen in dairy supply chains. And lastly, there's still a very high potential for innovations, particularly around low carbon solutions. So I mentioned there are quite a few ones which could have a very significant effect on the carbon footprint of dairy production that are in the pipeline, for example, feed additives, but also other ones. So, and those need to be tested and really rolled out into the market. So a lot of potential for companies that would like to have a climate impact to work on those and help them to really be rolled out. With this, thank you, and back to you, Florian. I'm looking forward to your questions later.
Tilman, thank you so much. And so we are getting to the moment where our audience is really invited to ask questions. I see some questions already popping up in the questions box. I don't see any hands being raised virtually. I'm not sure if this is just on my screen or whether there indeed are no hands up in the air at this point. Before I read out some of the questions we have received, maybe just a quick question to go back to our first speaker, Jan-Peter. Jan-Peter, you have mentioned, you have just alluded about the importance to, at some point, align also national targets with supply chain impact. And I was wondering whether you have some examples, like counter examples, where this you see like some early traction of actually this going into the right direction.
Yes. Yes, well, I think this is especially now with the policy being developed and having emission targets for each of the member states, which have to be translated into targets into the sector. Well, you see, at least for the Netherlands, you see there the sector has to contribute and is now trying to make a position what they can realistically contribute. But there is on a national scale, okay, we will reduce so many megatons, but for a company sourcing worldwide, they might say, okay, this country is producing very efficient, they have a low footprint, but if it increases the total emission in a country, those things might conflict. So going from a global perspective only to the country with the lowest emission will not work. So it's better to improve everywhere the footprint. But yeah, if you go to really compare, oh, that producer has a lower footprint, that's probably not the best option. If this, yeah.
Absolutely, thank you. So I do hear that we have a hand up from Ms. Martina Henry. So can we please unmute her so she can ask a question to the panel, please? Please.
Sorry, I actually asked it in the panel instead. But essentially it was to Tillman, and I was wondering about, you sort of went into some of it after I posted my question, but I was wondering what are the barriers to adoption, which you went through, and really, I suppose, what are the pressures on economies of scale at the farming level for some of those high-tech solutions to be really implemented?
All right, thank you, Martina, for this question. So I think, financing is really part of the puzzle. That's also part of the argument that I would try to make. And in some cases, access to finance, where you don't have the capex, obviously, is not a challenge. There, it's really about the business case, and also for other options, for the more high capex solutions, the business case is first what needs to be provided, right? And that's often challenging in an area where maybe subsidies and the prices for renewable energy goes down, where there's uncertain milk market. But we see that even if the business case is given, often there is what you're hinting towards. We see this in the market, that there is a problem of scale. So one individual farm will have really a hard time to access finance at good terms. So one important role might be for dairy companies or other parties to really pool those together and then be able to access much bigger chunks of funding from this pooled resource, right? So you might have just maybe a biodigester has investment needs of a couple of $100,000 only, which is very low for some of investors. So if you pool those together, you might reach the areas of millions or even tens of millions that might be needed for some investors to look at it. So this pooling is a very important effect and a very important aspect, and something that I see supply chain players can really add value, and also they could potentially bring in their part of their balance sheet in order to de-risk the investment as well for the financier.
Maybe this is Patrice. Maybe some explanation from our dairy development program. So we have a large dairy development program in Indonesia, in Asia, in Nigeria. And for the farmers in those countries, the farmer's livelihood is the most important part. So we don't talk about sustainability over there. We talk, how can we support you in improving your farmer's livelihood? We have two aspects. We try to support them with improving the yield of the cow, and yield of the cow, you can see it from the graph from Jan-Peter. Decreases the greenhouse gas per kg of milk. At the other side, we are trying to increase the quality of the milk. And when you improve the quality of the milk, you have less loss of milk, and you also increase the level of you reduce the sustainability level. So we try to always try to connect farmers' livelihood to sustainability over there. And one of the projects, and we also do it together with Wageningen University, is how can you reuse your manure in a much better way? Because a lot of manure is lost, go to the ditch, and is not reused on the soil, and the minerals are not reused. So we don't talk about sustainability in the dairy developing countries, but we talk improving farmers' livelihood, improving income for the farmer. So that is the starting point, and then later on, you can have other discussions about improving sustainability. But we always start with reducing cost, improving farmers' livelihood.
Yeah, thank you very much for these additions. I see we have another question asked by Mark McElroy, not to any of the particular panelists, so I read it out and then I leave it to those interested to reply to it. How do you know if any of these measures are working unless you're measuring changes in emissions at the farm level? How can changes in emissions at the farm level be measured? So maybe a question to you, Jan-Peter, but again, it's an open, and Tilman and Jaap, you might have a point of view on this as well.
Yeah. Yes, well, a very relevant question, but it's very difficult to really measure emissions on farm, especially as in agriculture, and mainly methane and nitrous oxide emissions are involved. Those are very difficult to measure directly. In research programs, this is done, but to do this on the standard way and at farm level is very complicated and costly. So normally these calculations always work with kind of emission factors. For some of the emissions, it's very clear. If you use less fertilizer, like you use less diesel, you have less CO2 emissions. If you use less fertilizer, you have less nitrous oxide emissions. But for other emissions, it doesn't work always. Like for methane, it's the feed composition determines, but that's not always a one-to-one relation. There are trade-offs. So it is largely depending on kind of emission factor-based calculations.
Thank you, Jan-Peter. And Jaap and Tim, would you like to add on to this?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you, Florian. I mean, I absolutely agree with Jaap and with Jan-Peter, and Jan-Peter is really the expert there. What I would like to point out, there's a difference between measuring and monitoring. So as Jan-Peter said, there's these emission factors, and they have been very successfully applied in different monitoring tools. Jan-Peter mentioned a few in his presentation. I mentioned some in my presentation. So there are quite a few monitoring tools out there that can be applied at farm level, which apply those emission factors in order to estimate the greenhouse gas impact of different solutions. And as I mentioned, we did a study last year where we compared 45 different tools, so quite a lot out there again, on their appropriateness and suitedness on the dairy sector, and identified 4 different scenarios, the best and the best suited monitoring tools. And they're really fairly powerful already. And we also see that they, for example, the Cool Farm tool, are really applied successfully to monitor the chain, but even then to form the basis for incentive payments, so carbon-based incentive payments. So they're they're fairly stable, even though, of course, there's still a lot of work to do to further improve them.
Yeah, tracers in Friesland Campina, but also in the whole Dutch dairy sector, we have also studied several tools. At this moment, all of the farmers in the Netherlands work with, as Jan-Peter said, the kringloopwijzer. That's an annual nutrient cycle model. Because one of the issues, you can have a great model, and I do believe the Cool Farm tool is a good model. But how do you get your data in the model? And that's the challenge for all the dairy processors who work with the farmers. So therefore, in the Netherlands, together with Wageningen University, we developed the annual nutrient cycle tool. All farmers have their data in that tool, so a large database, but also a lot of data from government, from feed suppliers are automatically loaded in that tool. And for the farmer, he only has to fill in only 5 or 6% of the data to calculate his own carbon footprint. So I do believe you can develop great tools, but within Friesland Campina, we have to work with 20,000 farmers. The challenge is, how do you get the data in the tool? And if you don't facilitate a farmer with collecting the data on a very easy way, it is very difficult to have the data on a farmer-specific level. So you have to work on data collection in a very automatic way. Otherwise, you won't move the farmers working with this kind of tools?
Yeah, thank you so much. I think we are actually getting to the close of our webinar. It's 5 o'clock on the dot in CET time here. So let me just briefly wrap up and express our gratitude to our speakers and attendees for making the time, listening in and participating actively in this really exciting and important webinar topic. I will just say that we will follow up with the presentations. We will share them with the participants. Jan, Peter, and Jan, with your blessing, we would also be very keen to facilitate bilateral contacts. Some of the people on the call might have had additional questions that could not be answered. And I will also briefly say that this has been a webinar on dairy at South Pole, and we of course cover also other sustainability topics, looking at carbon, energy, water, and other key issues. And we will be hosting more webinars over the next few months. And so please watch out for regular updates from our side on topical webinars, and we do look forward to your contribution and participation in the future. With this, thank you so much for your time and participation, and until the next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.